Okay, we're just about ready to get started here. Thank you all for coming. We just wanted to let the cheers subside from everybody here in the city at 7 p.m. as usual. Thanks again, everybody, for coming. This is the beginning of our latest webinar, the Swingle Clinic webinar series, presented by Dr. Mari Swingle. Tonight's topic is tech in the time of COVID. I'll just give you a little bit of a bio for Dr. Mari. Dr. Mari K. Swingle, or Dr. Mari as she tends to be referred to, has extensive experience from both the worlds of education and clinical psychology. Prior to the founding of the Swingle Clinic in 1997, Dr. Mari has worked extensively in curriculum development, language acquisition, and the exploration of learning modalities to enhance accelerated as well as remedial learning. In the early 2000s, Dr. Mari crossed over fully to clinical work, focusing on the role of neurophysiology in learning, generalized well-being, and mental health. Currently, Dr. Mari works with a wide range of neurophysiological ailments. Her specialties lie in anxiety, depression, trauma, obsessive-compulsive disorders, addiction, and non-clinical peak performance. She is further well known for her work with children and families experiencing behavioral and learning difficulties, including, but not limited to, defiance and conduct disorders, ADHD, dyslexia, processing, written output, speech, and auditory disorders. Dr. Mari also works with the dynamics that frequently arise in families with a child experiencing learning and or behavioral challenges, including parental fatigue, depression, anxiety, addictions, and couple parenting dynamics. This includes family counseling and couples therapy. About the turn of the millennium, Dr. Mari started noting an emergent trend of what she now terms eye interference, wherein a growing number of her clients' performance appeared to be affected by excessive usage of screen-based technologies. Eyes wide open, she also started noting accompanying generalized shifts in society and social behavior due to the same. She then dedicated the next decade and a half of her professional life exploring the specifics of how and why. Dr. Mari is now recognized as a known expert on the effects of eye technology, screen-based devices on the brain and behavior. She has delivered 2 TEDx talks, multiple keynotes around the globe, including keynote for the Childhood Summit in Brisbane, Australia, the Canadian Psychological Association, and guest speaker at San Francisco State University, Adler and TWU. Children Nature Network Conference, US and Canada, University of Aveiro, Portugal, Stockholm, Holland. The list goes on and on. Dr. Mari Swingle also does very strong community media outreach, speaking often on TV and radio, as well as at community events, parent and teacher associations, and events for the general public. Children and Nature Network Australia, Together for Charity Stockholm, among others, as well as numerous events in and around Vancouver, Canada, where she primarily practices. We are most happy to have her here tonight, and I will pass it along to Dr. Mari so she can take us through tech in the time of COVID.
Hello and welcome everybody. I first have to say, I suppose a wonderful coincidence of when we picked the 7 o'clock time. We didn't really have the cheering and the recognition for all the frontline workers happening, and we thought it would be a conflict, and then we of course went, no, it's absolutely not a conflict. We're not going to worry about the sound. We're going to listen to it all. So I think it's just a beautiful way to start this all off. Tech in the time of COVID. Okay. Before we get into the meat of the presentation, I want to do a little bit of an introduction or preamble to all of this. First and foremost, eye tech is not bad. I really, really want to emphasize that. My issues with interactive technologies or screen-based technologies, which I've since coined eye tech, have been with the perception of our lack of choice and our personal and professional lack of power over the role they have in our individual and collective lives. I've critiqued the uniformed buy-in, blind acceptance, apathy, and abdication in all realms, including education and parenting, medicine, romance and sexuality, work. The list is very long. But I'm not against technology. In fact, anything but. What I'm against is technology without purpose, or purpose that goes against persons and humanity. Vested interest promoting simply for profit, and naive consumption and distribution. Swallowing the pill without knowing what it is, or what it is doing to us as individuals in a culture. I'm against weaponizing and hostile dependency, but not against using it as the magnificent tool it was originally designed to be. My professional focus? Studying iTech from both biological and social standpoints, and distributing information which I trust will in turn develop into knowledge, and the ability to choose what roles we want iTech to have in our lives. Specifically, what we want to embrace and accept, what we want to unequivocally reject, and what we still want to ponder, discuss, and research before drawing conclusions. At no time has it ever been so important or evident. It's not if we do or don't use iTechnologies. It never has been. It is how, why, and when, and how often. Is iTech used as a complement or as a replacement and an override? Is it eclipsing all we are and have to offer each other? Or is it contributing to the greater good in times when most needed? These are the questions we all need to ask and seek to answer. So let's jump in. So all of that preamble was really about informed choice. In this presentation, I am not going to tell you what to do. I'm going to provide you with information and, yeah, a little counsel so that you can overtly choose yourselves. And heads on warning, I'm only going to cover the tip of the iceberg. I've written 2 books on this, and the second one I believe is over 550 pages. So our little time together here is just a tad. Or as I like to say, just a little nibble. Okay, so why is it so important? Well, in addition to the physical threat of COVID-19, emotional unrest and emotional deregulation are now augmenting in both clinical and general populations. What I mean by clinical are people who are actively seeking treatment or actually suffering from mental illness or deregulation at the moment, and those who aren't, which is general population. So unrest and emotional deregulation are also now a serious threat to individual and collective health, not just the virus itself. Public hysteria, paranoia, fear-mongering, ostentatious disregard, and harmful behaviors, as well as individual private suffering, anxiety, depression, loneliness, frustration, fear and anger, hopelessness, all of them and more are on the rise. So due to true fear, the unknown, isolation, and fading purpose, many, if not most of us, are off work, out of school, and have restricted play, mostly the kids. We're all glued to our iTech, the pads, pods, phones, tablets, even good old-fashioned TV. And it's creating or feeding hysteria. Everybody knows of the good old hoarding, I should say, of toilet paper as if it were gold. But something different is happening too. The positives are blooming, and I'm so overjoyed to see that. When I talk, I'm so often pulled to the negative because that's what needs more attention. But today, I really want to focus on the positives as well. In many of my talks, I've spoken to iTech eclipsing many of the things that are important to us. But maybe now there's a bit of a twist. You know, perhaps some of the positives are overshadowing the negatives. And I'm really hoping for a reverse eclipse, some beauty in all of this. And I'm questioning, is there a silver lining in the otherwise dark hole and horrible tragedy of COVID-19? Along with screen-based fear-mongering and hysteria, there's mounting beauty and unity. We're seeing a positive adaptation. We're seeing online orchestras and bands, choirs and choruses. They're having their rehearsals online. Their book clubs, go-to meetings for work, and not just to talk about work, for check-ins. Let's all remember that many of us spend a large portion of our time with our coworkers, not necessarily our families or our partners. There's Skype family game nights now too for people who live in different households, and of course good old Zoom parties. So is polarization the silver lining of COVID-19? So let's explore polarities. So what are the polarities? Well, the negative is succumbing to the infodemic and the attention economy, the hyped up sensationalism. Or the positive, which is using iTech as a tool of connection and purpose. And how can you tell the difference? Let's explore. So in times of crisis or the great unknown, we tend to polarize. So there's positive polarity and negative polarity. Positive polarity, that's using your iTech as an ideal tool of connection for interpersonal, professional, and information gathering. And why not for creativity too? Positive polarity of tech use is supporting belonging, individual and common community, purpose, when interpersonal, face-to-face, and heart-to-heart are not possible or not wise. The negative polarity is succumbing to the infodemic and the attention economy, as opposed to the information economy. Informative as opposed to sensational news. So the negative polarity supports the hysteria, the fear-mongering, attentional profiteering. This is where folks are going after ratings. Platforms are collecting your data and selling it or using it to guide advertising towards you, etc. And of course, political influence and publicity seeking. Positive polarity, some examples, or outcomes, I should say, are connection, community, and most importantly, feelings of wellness and functional knowledge. What I mean by functional is it's actionable. You can actually do something about it because you have the, I should say, correct information or the correct feelings to do good. Negative polarity, it's negative arousal. It's anxiety and depression or dysfunctional knowledge, the type of knowledge that feeds compulsion, fretting, and insomnia. So what are the keys here? positive use is selective and purposeful usage. And it's both emotional and rational. The negative is purely emotional use, which tends to involve a loss of rationality and obfuscated or clouded purpose. And key is an inability to detach from it. So apologies, I'm going to get a little sciencey here, but the reason for that is I truly believe in not just, as I said, telling people what to do and expecting people to follow. I want to share with you the whys so that you can really choose what you want to do. So I'm going to go back to some of the science in my earlier work, long before good old COVID-19. I was researching what we used to call internet addiction at the time, and people who were diagnosed with such, and comparing the brains of folks diagnosed with internet addiction, comparing the physiology as well to the general population. And what I was specifically looking at was what excess and inappropriate eye-tech usage looked like on the brain. So my modality was electroencephalography, and most of you are probably quite familiar now with brainwaves, but these are EEG brainwaves. And what we're doing is we're looking, brainwaves, I suppose is the best way to say, it's the electrical activity off of the upper level of the cortex, upper level of the brain, that speaks to functionality. It speaks to how our brains are functioning. And we can get tons and tons of information through 19 sites, even up to 120 actually, but I did 19. And also what we tend to use clinically are 5 sites that give us the most important information. So what I did is I took these 2 sets. I took the 20-point site and I took the 5-point, and I compared them to databases. I compared them to normative. So these are the brains of normal or typical or efficient brains. So they're measurements from people who have no reported or diagnosed mental health issues. So they don't have learning disabilities, they don't have behavioral issues, mood deregulation, addiction, schizophrenia, etc. I also compared them to clinical databases, and that's exactly the opposite. These are measurements of inefficiency or of brains of people who have been diagnosed or have active symptoms of disabilities or mental health issues. So ADHD, depression, anxiety, psychosis, etc. Now, if all that seems a little too complex, this graph might help you out. So what I am doing is I'm comparing people who use their screens excessively to addictive measures to the green X, which is the normative, the typical. But I'm also comparing them to the people who do have expressed mental health issues, so extreme depression on one end and extreme euphoria on the end. So when we compare those two, or as it looks like on this graph, the 3, you get a pretty good picture of what's going on. Warning, warning, getting more sciencey. Okay, so for those of you who remember your normative curve, what I found was that 77% of the individuals in my study had a brain deregulation 2 standard deviations out. That's huge. Now, for those of you where high school math or for BA math is long gone, all that means is they're not like 95% of us. They're 2.5% of the 2 extremes. So very different brains is what you want to take away from this. A very different brain function, I should say. So when I looked and compared to the database of people who were diagnosed with active conditions, I found that 100% of my participants had a brainwave signature or functionality associated with hyperarousal, agitation, anxiety, addiction, and insomnia. 89% had a brainwave signature associated with mind chatter and arousal, a very specific form of ADHD that we see in the frontal lobes. 66% had a hyperarousal, perseveration, what we see in fretting and obsessive compulsive disorder. 40% had a signature associated with emotional deregulation, primarily agitated depression, and 27% had something that we also see in a different form of ADHD, usually the hyperactive form, which is a lack of body stillness. And you might have noticed a theme here. And to simplify it all, what we see is systematic hyperarousal and brain deregulation, and very strong. For those of you who like pretty pictures, this is what it looked like on my first screen in 2012. Okay. Now, a really interesting thing about research and science is disagreement really, really fuels it. We love to debate and contrast and whatnot. And what I found very, very, very early on was something very, very unusual. Is everybody was agreeing. All of the heavy hitters that were studying this, myself included, were seeing the same thing. And that is unheard of. And I have to qualify non-vested interest. So not the game producers and the people who were trying to sell you stuff. Okay. So what we were all finding was there was a huge alliance with excessive, compulsive, uncomplimentary, and addictive usage had very high alliance with anxiety, depression, and the obsessive compulsive realm. And this is why it is so important today. Apart from the obvious, it's so important for personal and societal mental health. Okay. And it's doubly important during a crisis, during our current pandemic. Why is this? Well, in times of crisis, reality is changing, it's challenged. The boundaries of rational and irrational thoughts and fears are muddied or muddled. We're being asked to be obsessive with hand washing and sanitizing. We're being asked to be paranoid, physical distancing, stay at home. We're faced with the constant and changing unknown. And that makes our state of arousal unnaturally heightened. And we're all seeking soothing. That level of arousal is uncomfortable for all of us. The proverbial boogeyman is now around the corner. And the monster is actually under the bed, boarding up stores. And this is what we see in times of hurricane, extreme destitution, and poverty. But now, shamefully, it's in distrust. Like in our dystopic fiction, all of the high-end stores are boarding up on our primary streets in Vancouver, and I think around the world too. In times of crisis, reality as we know it is challenged. We're all more prone to anxiety, insomnia, agitation, frustration, sadness, anger, and yes, depression too. All emotions and behaviors can easily become magnified and augmented and polarized. By the way, this is not uncommon in human history. It's just not common in modern history. Most people under 70, in Western culture that is, have never experienced such. The most current things in Western history are the Spanish flu, tuberculosis, polio, and a few wars. But nowadays, most of us are completely distanced through this experience by history, or it is history. I suppose a little tongue-in-cheek good news is we've all had it so easy. We now have lower stress resilience, and we're out of practice in terms of how to manage our arousal or our feelings in stressful times. And many of us now crave soothing in the absence of security. For better or for worse, this is where we're finding it. Now that we're off work, school is mostly online, we're getting organized. We have restricted normal routines, and of course, children have extremely restricted play. So we're all glued to our tech. But when we turn to screens in times of psychological unrest, fear, boredom, social isolation, loneliness, etc., excessive and otherwise inappropriate usage is actually serving a purpose. So this is the catch-22 I want to talk to you about. And also to tie in with the earlier research on excessive screen use and screen addiction. What we know from all of our former research is if we turn to screens instead of seeking professional help or otherwise communicating our mental, physical, or emotional unrest to family or friends or people who can help us, be with us, when we seek some sort of solace or shelter in escaping to screens, we make it worse. Escaping to screens exacerbates rather than solves or soothes our fears and unrest. So I'm just going to skim over this quickly, but what you want to take from a larger body of research is excessive use leads to increased deficiencies in self-regulation. It develops into cognitive preoccupation with the medium, the screens, and its compulsive use. You develop obsessive thought process, and you're unable to detach. Highly associated with negative outcomes. In today's situation, that's interpersonal difficulties at home, and we're all at home together, so that magnification is troublesome. Depression was both a predictor and a comorbidity, cause and symptom, and loneliness was the single most predictive factor for gaming addiction. The obsessive compulsive spectrum, well, they're a dysfunctional or irrational type of soothing behavior. They're behavioral manifestations of anxiety, and clicking is now one of them. In times of unrest and fear, we are all at risk of more obsessive and compulsive patterns with our eye tech, so social media, news feeds, etc. And going back to the polarization, when the activity no longer serves a functional purpose, it only is trying to soothe our emotions, purely an attempt at emotional soothing and anxiety relief, that gets us into further anxiety. So the summary here is excessive or excessive usage maintains anxiety rather than relieves it. So it's a maintenance, negative maintenance. So summary once again, inappropriate or excessive use both make and keep you anxious and negative arousal. This is probably a good time to go back to exploring the polarities. So arousal 101. Arousal is negative and positive. And both negative and positive arousal have a cycle. And they both further have a negative or positive end. Surprise! We like them both. Our physiology likes both negative and positive arousal. Okay. Think of scary movies and things like that. The big one is gambling. Why, when people win $1,000 in the slot machines, don't they just go home and do something wonderful with that $1,000? No, they put the coins back in because the arousal of the unknown, the win and the lose, is higher for them than the value of the money. It's really interesting stuff if you think about it. So let's have a closer look. Again, arousal is a cycle, not a continuum. And the pattern is there's an initiation, there's a start, there's a sustaining, and then there's a conclusion. And if arousal is sustained too long without either a negative or a positive conclusion, we emotionally deregulate. For those of you with children, you know they tantrum. Even mature adults, a really good example is concert goers. If the band is late and you're just standing around there with a couple of hundred people, people start to feel really, I'm not going to say unwell, but they're not feeling, they're unrested, I guess is a good way to put it. In an extreme, people start to riot and throw things. Okay. So also, if a new cycle is initiated before we have processed the release, we loop too quickly back to the sustaining phase, and our physiology does too. We can't sustain the arousal. This is why we have anxiety, anger, and insomnia. Okay, so if I'm losing anybody here in some of those, I guess, wordy descriptions, examples really help. And I'd like to use an old world and a new world example. So in the old world, I mean, we got pretty excited about things. A letter of old, when it was arriving, many of us would run home from work or school to see if a letter had arrived, a birthday card or what have you. But if it wasn't in the mail, we didn't, hunker down by the mailbox and wait for it. We knew it was futile. The mail came at 4 o'clock, and there was going to be nothing happening between now and 4. So we processed this disappointment, got on with our days, and then slowly ramped up to the next delivery time. That's not the case with all of our tech. Text messages and emails and this, that, and the other are constantly bombarding us all the time. So this is what I mean by that constant arousal. We never complete a cycle, and therefore don't tend to be satisfied and stay in set arousal. And nowadays, in good old COVID, in a pandemic, I'd say limited options on news, feedback, and other social media. Ha, ha, ha. Okay, our options are on steroids, and they confuse the brain and overload our emotions. The key, however, to remember is the issue only exists with excess, or if you're using your tech as an emotional regulator. But if you use it as a true tool of connection, you're okay. So there's just a little bit of a review for you. Okay, in the positive, your use has an explicit purpose. You feel fulfilled, and that's why you can let go. You can move on, relax, and sleep. Or if it's negative, you process and reset. You accept or try again. The negative, again, the issue is it has no end. You don't stop when you get what you need because you haven't figured out what you need. And you go back for more and more and more. And the why is because your brain and body are not actually getting what they need. You're not actually seeking information. You're seeking an emotion. And you'll never get the emotion that fully soothes you. So you're just seeking and caught in arousal. So how do we use technology as a tool of communication rather than a distraction, mood deregulation, and isolation? How do we repolarize? Okay, First thing is get off the wheel and ask yourself, which little mousie do you want to be? Simple tips. Okay. I just have 5 simple guidelines for everyone. So in terms of the news, please watch only reliable channels and no more than twice a day. So it really is about true updates, not getting caught in the hype and seeking answers. You probably already notice the news is just cycling and cycling and cycling, featuring different people saying the same things. But the important stuff you can get checking in twice. Okay, friends, reach out, reach out, reach out. This is actually the time for FaceTime, video chat, Skype, Zoom, etc. Any and all platforms and all good old landlines if you still have one. Very important, stop texting. Emotions do not translate well. In fact, it's exactly the opposite with text and SMS. They exacerbate the probability of misinterpretation as well. Emojis just don't cut it. They're a language of the eyes, not of the heart. And the reason why we have emojis is texts need stage direction. To feel good, to feel better, to feel connected, we need voice prosody. And voice prosody is just the sing-song of voice. It denotes caring, mood, positive and negative. But it's the way we connect. This is extremely important for single people or people who are living alone. Now that many of us have lost touch, voice, 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 hearing voices is paramount. Okay, so I'm going to go in a little more detail on this because I think it's very important. So this is 2.8. Okay, so an example of why not to test. Okay, a very good example is face-to-face and phone are governed by socially predetermined temporal sequencing. What that means is when I'm talking to you, I respond. You're never faced with a silence. And if you are faced with a silence, it actually means something. Versus with silence and text, you're not sure whether it's because somebody's ignoring you, or they had to run out, or they're busy at work, or they're mad at you. You don't know why it goes silent. Okay. And the other is we can control it for bad or for worse. Therefore, we alter anticipatory cycles. So some of us are a little bit, I don't want to say nasty, but we intentionally don't respond. Okay. But bottom line is cycles can be interpreted and misinterpreted and perseverated upon or fretted upon. So we create reward uncertainty in all forms of standard interpersonal communication. And back to the gambling response. That's the way our brains are functioning. Okay. Community. Find a way to continue. Choirs and choruses, book clubs, religious groups, tea parties, and happy hours with a fine glass of red. Please do your FaceTime with your friends and phone chat, all of it, very important. Okay. Social media, please use this very, very cautiously. Remember you're in an echo chamber, the algorithms, and they're going to feed back everything that you're looking at. So if you're feeling really frightened, you're going to get a lot of more frightening things. YouTube is another example. The algorithms are designed to bring you to more and more exciting or explicit content. The other is beware the void after the supposed connect. There's a big difference between connecting with a friend in a face chat versus posting on Facebook. There tends to be a void after Facebook versus not so when you actually have a one-on-one connection. So bottom line, loop in the good stuff. Okay. Living environment. This one is going to be bifurcated to those living alone versus those in couples and large and small family groups. So for those of you who are living alone, it's going to be really important to learn to like yourself, and if you can, appreciate solitude as an opportunity. Do all those things you never had time to do, and of course the reach out. For those of you living in families and couples, learn to ask for what you need. The key thing, we joke a lot as therapists that, you know, nobody can actually read your mind. Spouses tend to actually be really bad at that. And a really, really good policy that helps us all is think of giving before taking. And what you find is if your partner is in distress and you give, it reduces their stress. If you're in stress or distress, sometimes giving actually will take you out of that and makes you feel better. It's a very good guideline. Okay, so this is just a summary of all of those. Okay, so bottom line, in crisis in the unknown, screens are the wrong place to soothe unless they explicitly inform, complement, or aid to maintain your norms, typically belonging and purpose, community, friends and family, hobbies and work. Be very, very careful, please, of quantities and purpose of entertainment and distraction. They can easily loop into the negative and have you hopping on the endless arousal loop. Why? Well, they hijack and interfere with biology. Let me give you a couple of examples. Okay. And again, I'm going to go back to the science. There's something called an ERP wave, and it's an event-related potential wave. And these get released whenever there's an atypical sign or signal in our olfactory, auditory, and any of our senses. So in our sight, smell, and hearing, typically. And when we get those, we get this wave, which signals that we need to act. Okay. I like to tell a story, I call it of tigers and bears. And my story is that of a young man walking in the woods, say, you know, anywhere from 800 to 1,000 years ago. And he's noticing the slight breeze in the air, and he's noticing the rustle of the leaves, maybe the slight brush of the grass underfoot. Notices the smell of moisture in the air, maybe it's going to rain tomorrow. And all of a sudden he hears a loud snap. And he freezes. Why? Because that loud snap in those days was probably indicative of a large mammal in the vicinity. And if he acts quickly, and it's a deer, he could chase it, provide food for his family. Conversely, if it was a tiger or bear, depending on where you picture this young man, he could become dinner, and he has to act quickly to get out of there. So that snap actually triggered an ERP wave, the action wave, the potential wave. And because action requires often movement, it also releases adrenaline because you would have to run after or away from the large mammal. Guess what wave the dings and the bings and the beeps and the bops of all of our tech trigger? You got it. They trigger the ERP wave. Our biology has not caught up. So when we expose ourselves to all of these dings and bings, we get ourselves in hyperarousal. And it can feel good or feel bad. Some of us seek adrenaline so it feels good, so we actually send more texts so we get more bings back. And for some of us, yeah, it makes us feel quite bad. So that's a good example of the hijacking. Another one that I want to talk about is flicker and flash rate, typically blue light and melatonin. So if you're having troubles with insomnia, and many of us are now with the unknown, and unregulated work cycles make for unregulated sleep cycles. But if you are on your screen 1 hour before you intend your head to hit the pillow, you are blocking your melatonin production by at least 50%. This is the work of Dr. Walker, by the way, if you want to look him up. And I don't have to tell you what blocking melatonin does. Okay. The other thing that Dr. Walker discovered was that it delays sleep onset by anywhere from a half an hour to 90 minutes, depending on your physiology. And it's not just those of you who know you're awake, it's also those of you who think you're sleeping. Your sleep cycle is actually delayed, so you don't get into the deep sleep or the REM sleep, the restorative sleeps. So what it means is you all have at least 1 hour less sleep. And if I can remind you, a prime form of torture is sleep deprivation. Okay, don't mean to get too sensationalist here myself, but I think it's a really important one to run home. That if you are having trouble with insomnia, make sure all of your screens are off long before you want to fall asleep. The other interesting factor is something Dr. Walker called a sleep hangover, which is, believe it or not, this is not only the night you're on your screen, but also 3 nights after. Okay. So the key thing to remember for your wellness is it's not if we do or don't use screens, high-tech or interactive technology. It's how and why, when and how much. So please ask yourself, how are you and yours using your tech? So I'm going to be rounding up now, and many of you might be asking why I did not focus more on the specifics of children. I know many of you are very, very worried and frustrated, etc. But I wanted to have the first webinar focus on the caretakers, because in times of crisis, it's imperative to take care of the caretaker first. Only when the carer is strong, then can they care for their ward. What we learned a long time ago is helping a mother with her self-regulation goes miles in helping her child or children. It's paramount, if not more important, than helping the child. The same, by the way, holds true for fathers. We just did the research on the moms first. And sorry, but there's genderism here, because even in 2020, there are more moms than dads that tend to be in primary parental role. Okay, a really good analogy here is an analogy of nutrition in the breast. And I'm going to use an example of extreme crisis, which is famine. So if you take a mother and a very young child or an infant, and you have a small amount of food, most of us are inclined to give it to the child, but that's actually the wrong thing to do. You want to give it to the mother, because the mother can feed the child through her breast, literally through breast milk. But if we want to take it into analogy, the analogy is the same. If you take care of the mother, she can take care of her child. If a mother is emotionally regulated, she has the energy to assist with the emotional regulation of her child. If the child and the mother are emotionally regulated, and you help the child with regulation, they're still going to have to deal with the mature caretaker in their lives that's having trouble. But don't worry, I will directly tackle children and parenting and education in part 2. So thank you so much for your attention today and participating. And this rounds up today. Back to you, Colin.
Thank you very much, Dr. Murray. Thank you, everybody that came to our webinar tonight. Want to appreciate you very much for coming. This webinar will be rebroadcast on YouTube on this coming Friday at 12 p.m. if you missed anything. We've also got our Swingle Clinic groups going on. Next one coming up is Thursday at 6 p.m. More of a question and answer focus. And our next free public webinar is Wednesday, April 8th, presented by Dr. Paul Swingle. Thank you again, everybody. This concludes our webinar, and we'll see you next time.